Let's start off with a word of prayer. Dear God, I pray that you can just speak through me. Help me to deliver the message that you need me to deliver today. Help to give me the right words, to keep my nerves about me, and to be completely and fully dependent on you in all I do and say. It's in your name that I pray. Amen. What if I told you that it is possible for you to never sin again? Never, ever sin again. It is possible for any Christian, anywhere, at any time, to never sin again. Now, this might seem like a crazy claim, but it's actually not that far off. See, when you think about it, sin always stems from one temptation, whether it's a passive temptation or an aggressive temptation. And these passive temptation would look like something like, oh, I didn't know this was going to happen. We were there, and my mom left, and it was just the two of us, and the movie was over, and it just kind of happened. Or you find yourself in these situations. Versus an aggressive sin is something like, you plan to go and steal something, you plan to go and take something, or you're seeking after some type of thrill or something that you know is wrong. Even if you think about the first original sin, you actually see that started off with a temptation. Adam and Eve had it perfectly set up in the garden. Everything was going great, and the devil came in, the serpent came in, the master of trickery and lies, and placed that doubt in their mind and tempted them to try that apple, to try out and see what it is that they think that they're missing, even though they knew they shouldn't do it. So if we can come down to this idea that sin starts off as a temptation, and we can learn to resist that temptation, we can learn to never sin again. Now, as a preference to this, before I get lots and tons of emails saying about how wrong this is, I'm going to tell you straight off that there is no expectation that we will ever be perfect in any kind of way. The Bible does not support that. There's no verse that says once you're born again, you are perfect, and that's it. That's it. You're going to be perfect and flawless. In fact, the Bible actually says the exact opposite of that, that as time goes on, we're going to get more and more trials and tribulations, that we're going to get attacked, and it's going to be kind of awkward and tough. Romans 8:36 actually, it's a great line saying that when we become Christians, we're going to be going on through a lot of different things that are coming our way, and it gives you a very graphic description of some of the different things that might be happening. But fortunately, we can also look through Romans 11 and seeing that in Romans 11, starting in verse 11, going through verse 24, it goes all the way through talking about how we are not expected to be perfect in our sin, even after the fact of us accepting Christ into our life and trying to live a holy life, being guided by the Spirit. And so both of those are really great passages in the New Testament saying even after we have that salvation, we're not expected to be perfect. However, we are expected still to try to resist that temptation, in fact, to flee from that temptation and be away from it as much as possible. I'm going to read through James 1:13 through verse 15. It says this: "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted from God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death." So we can see in that verse that we are going to be going through these things, but there's a difference between temptations, trials, and tribulations. Or a difference, rather, between temptations and then trials and tribulations. And here in James, we see that temptations don't come from God. So when we look at it closer, we see that temptations actually come from the devil, from our own selfish ambitions, from the flaws of the flesh. And just like Adam and Eve, we can see the serpent coming in, the devil coming in, Satan, however you want to view him. He's coming in with his tricks and his lies to try to convince us to be veering away from God, to be sinning. And so, fortunately, this is not something that we have to go without as Christians. We know exactly what it is that we can do. And I'm going to give you the 3 techniques that will show every Christian how to resist temptations. And these 3 techniques are all techniques that Jesus has used. And we're going to be looking through Matthew verses 4 through 11, as well as Luke verses 1 through 13. We're going to start off with Luke, and I'm going to be reading through, again, verses 1 through 13. And then Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing during those days, and when they were ended, he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread." And Jesus answered to him, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone." And the devil took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said to him, "To you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to who I will. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." And Jesus answered to him, "It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." And so the devil took him to Jerusalem and set him up on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against the stone." Jesus answered him, "It is said, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." And when the devil had ended his temptation, he departed from him until an opportune time. So we're going to look through this, and we're going to see the 3 different techniques that Jesus uses in order to resist the temptations. Now, one of the most amazing things is we see that Jesus, being fully God and fully man, he's so perfect, but he still goes through the same things that we go through. This part of the section starts off with him saying that he's going into the desert to fast. He starts off hungry, and the first thing that the devil does is lay down this temptation of food. It's not something that's so grandiose and so hard to obtain or anything like that. It's just the basic, simple urges of the flesh that we need in order to survive. But Jesus is resisting him. And so even just from the get-go, we see that there's strong temptations coming into play. But Jesus is still able to resist them. The first thing that Jesus does that we should amplify as Christians, we need to know our facts. Know your facts. That's the first thing that we need to do, the first technique that we need to install. Now we actually see this first, not from Jesus, but we actually see it from the devil in a few different verses in a few different places. And the devil, like he's saying, he's a master of trickery and lies. And one of the most convincing and compelling lies that you can ever tell somebody is one that's intermingled with the truth. We can see different lies on a spectrum, all the way from there's the truth, and then there's an absolute lie, but there's white lies, there's half of truth, and all these little things that are mixed in there. And he can use any range of those to try to convince you to do the different things that you're supposed to be doing. And part of that is also taking things out of context. He takes things out of context. When we look in verse 10, he says, the devil says, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you and guarding you, and on your hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." So he's quoting Old Testament here, talking about the Messiah. He's saying, hey, you are the Messiah, and because you're the Messiah, nothing bad can happen to you, essentially. We know later on that bad things will. But he's saying, you will be protected. The angels will literally come down from the heavens and make sure that you are okay. He's using these facts from the Old Testament, obviously something that Jesus would know very well, to convince Jesus to fall into this sin. But we see that Jesus actually knows his facts better. He knows them, and he actually uses them too. It's one thing to know the facts, it's another thing to be able to use them the right way. It's kind of like having a car that works really well, but if you don't know how to drive it, then it doesn't work as well. And so we see him actually in almost every instance quoting scripture back to him, putting things back in context, and taking that power away from Satan. And we see this several times as we go through. Every single time he responds. When he's tempted with the bread, Jesus answered him, "As it is written," and he gives an explanation. When he's tempted in this instance, at the end he said, Jesus answered him, "You shall know, as it is written, you shall not put your God to the test." And he does it on all 3 of them. So we need to make sure that we know our facts. Know our facts. This is not too different from knowing our facts when we're knowing our rights when we go to face a judge in court. Yes, the judge knows the facts, the laws, and he lays them down, and he gives an assertion that is important and that is vindictive of anything going on. But that's why we have lawyers who will come in and will say, Your Honor, I object, because they know the rights of the court too, and they'll be able to step up and say, listen, you're not wrong, but look, you're forgetting this part. This part is essential to the story, and without it, our truth is not truth anymore. So knowing your facts is part of being able to, knowing your facts fully is part of the strength in being able to resist temptation. The second very important part is to remember your purpose. Now, when I say remember your purpose, a lot of people tend to think of Jeremiah 29:11, which is a really popular verse. I'm going to read it really quickly. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." And this is a great verse to think about. In context, it's a little bit different than most people present it, but it's a really good way of us to be reminded that God does have something in store for us and that he does have a purpose for us. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that we're going to be prosperous and we're going to have super great success, and by worldly standards we're going to be ranked so high that people will be like, wow, God must be real because you are so great and you are so strong and powerful and successful, and your wife is really awesome and your family is super great and your finances are all in line and you have no worries in the world. That's not what this verse means. Not at all. And we need to remember that. And we need to remember the purpose of why we're here, and that's to build God's kingdom, to fulfill the Great Commission and going out and building disciples and expanding God's kingdom. One of the best examples of knowing to fulfill their purpose and remembering their purpose is the Tuskegee Airmen. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Tuskegee Airmen, they were the first really official, exclusively black group during World War II. There were fighter pilots that came in. And if you know anything about World War II and the history of America at that time, you know that racism is still very prevalent, so they are completely segregated away. Now, what made the Tuskegee Airmen so successful was the fact that they remembered their purpose. During this time, a lot of bombers, a lot of escorts and different things were going through enemy territory in airspace, and the fighter pilots that would be going along with them that were trained by the Air Force, the Germans would, very tactfully, they'd send in a small little squadron of planes to do a really brief attack or even just pass by in front of them. And all the fighter pilots for our powers, they would go and they'd chase them away, and they would fight them and they'd try to knock them down. Now, in that process, they ended up leaving their bombers, their escorts, whoever it was that they were taking across the airspace, they'd leave them completely open and vulnerable. And another squadron or two squadrons would come in and be able to take them out easy, no sweat at all. Now, the great thing about the Tuskegee Airmen is that because, actually, interestingly enough, how prevalent the racism was, they were schooled to say, no matter what, all you're supposed to do is protect them, even if that means that you fly your plane in front of the bullets without shooting. You just have to make sure that they get from point A to point B. Doesn't matter who you knock down. Nobody cares. No one's going to keep records of it anyway because it doesn't matter. You're black. Fortunately, we've come a long way since then. But now when we look at the Tuskegee Airmen, they did their purpose. They fulfilled their goals. Instead of chasing off and taking the easy things, the nice, easy route, and the things that are going to look good, and they can come back and say, I shot down 5 of those Germans today. I took out 10 Nazis this week. And they were able to say, we got our escorts from point A to point B, and they hardly ever failed in any kind of way in their mission. They were extremely successful to the point where generals and anybody on higher power were suggesting and recommending and saying that they needed the Tuskegee Airmen. They remembered their purpose, not to chase the silly things, the easy things, but to remember that they are supposed to have this one goal, as boring as it may seem, as dumb as it may seem, as demoting as it may seem, just to take them from one point to the other and not chase the easy targets. Remembering their purpose was what brought them their success and what brought them their fame, and actually ended up moving them more forward than anything else in the war could have. This applies exactly to us. Whatever your purpose is, whatever your specific individual thing is, whether God has revealed it to you or not, whether you know what you're supposed to be doing with your life, who you're supposed to be marrying, dating, building a family with, where you're supposed to be working, how much money you're supposed to be making, where you're supposed to be living, no matter what your purpose is, our main thing is that we are serving God and that we are living up to the expectations that He has set for us. So we need to make sure that we're remembering our purpose. So when these temptations come, we can easily ask that question of, is this fulfilling my purpose? Is this taking me away from the thing that God has set for me? Is this having me leave my escort to go chase some silly things? Or am I allowed to stay right here? Is this not going to deviate from what I need to do? So that's step 2. So we've got know your facts as the first technique. The second one being remember your purpose. And the third one is reject your tempter. Now this might seem kind of silly because it's so simple. Just to basically, just say no. Just say no. And, we actually see Jesus doing that a lot. There's no points where he's trying to be politically correct. There's no points where he's trying to spare people's feelings. In fact, when you look at it, the more that you search and find Jesus interacting with people in the Bible, the more you see what we would consider a lot of negative emotions. You see some sadness, depression. You see a lot of anger, especially from the Pharisees. A lot of confusion, even from his own disciples. These aren't necessarily positive things, but Jesus is the one that we're supposed to be reflecting. And when we're looking at his motive for things, we see the right things appearing. We're going to switch from Luke into the other synoptic story of Matthew chapter 4. And I'm going to look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, one of the last things that Jesus says to Satan. It says, "Be gone, Satan, for it is written," and then he gives him his facts. Straight up he says, "Be gone, get out of here, thou shalt not." I mean, he probably didn't say that, but he said, "Be gone, get out of here." He rejected his tempter and said, "You need to go away." Another great instance where Jesus is rejecting his tempter in a very specific way is Matthew 16:23, when he says, "Get thee behind me." And he's talking to Peter, and he's saying, Peter's trying so hard to be good little Peter, and he's saying, Jesus, we're not going to let you die. We won't let anything bad happen to you. And Jesus says, "Get thee behind me, for that is not of the Lord. That is of your own human, selfish ambition, and I will not stand for it." And although it might be a little bit dramatic, Jesus wasn't exactly known for being a soft-spoken person. So it works out really well. So we need to make sure we are rejecting that tempter. Satan is basically a very smart playground bully. He's bigger than us, he's badder than us, and it wouldn't be too hard for him to take our lunch money. But when we say no, and we do it with authority behind us, there's nothing he can do about it. Just imagine, if you will, picture a big kid, probably somebody about my size, picking on another little kid when they're in 5th grade, and he goes up to him and he says, "Hey, give me your lunch money." And the kid he says no and anything like that, and the devil's just going right back at him and everything, and it's not a good situation. And a lot of times, obviously, the bully's going to win out. However, we're told as we're growing up, we need to go get a teacher, go get an adult. Why? Because the authority of that adult is going to be able to stop that playground bully from doing whatever it is that they want to do. Right? If you have a playground bully walk up to a 5th grader and there's the teacher standing right behind him, he's probably not even going to try. He's not even going to attempt it. Now, Satan, unfortunately, is a lot more bold than that. And he is, even when we have Christ backing us, behind us, knowing that he's there, he's still going to attack us. But when we say, "Be gone, get out of here, for I am saved and I am held responsible and I am backed by the power of God, and I'm going to follow him because he's telling me what to do. He's got me the best in mind for me, and he's going to make sure that I'm staying on track." The devil has nothing to do, but he has to go. In both instances, both in Matthew 4 and in Luke, we both see that both times after Jesus says, "Be gone," that the devil leaves. He leaves. He doesn't tempt him again. He doesn't give another snide remark. He doesn't try one more thing, or he isn't just kind of quiet. The devil leaves and prepares for another time. It is so powerful just to say no, go away, that he literally has to leave and prepare. Not just, I'm going to try again later, but he's going to go actively prepare. And we can see several times the New Testament in the Synoptic Gospels that that the devil's going to come back and do some pretty crazy things. Even though Jesus is obviously going to be winning out every single time. So, we know that we need to be resisting temptation. James 1:3, like I said at the beginning, shows us that we need to resist it. And God's never going to give us anything that is a temptation. He might give us trials and tribulations, but never a temptation. And anytime that we do have those temptations, we need to do exactly just like what Jesus said that we need to do. The first thing, remember, we need to know your facts. You need to know your facts. Know everything, the truth, the whole truth, and maybe even some things that aren't the truth, just so you can make sure you know what is right and what is not right. So that way you can use it to the fullest extent, just like Jesus was using the truth to the fullest extent against the devil, who was using only partially the truth. The second thing we need to remember to do is to remember our purpose. Just like the Tuskegee Airmen remembered their purpose, and they were the most successful group and advanced the black culture within the armed forces into a higher standing. We need to remember our purpose. Just like Jesus was remembering his purpose, he didn't fall to the temptations of the devil because he had something much grander in store for him. Even though it would have been so much easier for him just to give up then, he remembered his purpose and continued on in the right way. And remember, the last thing we need to do is to reject our tempter. Just say no. Just say no. Say go away. Say no to drugs. Say no to Satan. It's pretty much the same thing. But just say no. Say go away, get away, right away. And one of the greatest ways to do this is to do this with a friend. It can be so tough. And you'll notice that when the devil was tempting him, it was when Jesus was alone and when he was vulnerable. Fortunately for Jesus, being fully God and knowing all these things, he was able to get out of that situation fairly unscathed. But I'm not fully God. I'm going to guess that nobody else here is fully God. I guess that no one else is here. And so because of that, we were made for community. We need to have a community group around us. So I encourage you to find a community group. The church has wonderful opportunities to get connected in several different ways, whether you're looking just for some friends to hang out with, or if you have a specific temptation that you're dealing with, whether that's a drug or alcohol addiction, a sexual addiction, problems within your marriage or your family, gambling, and whatever it might be for you, whatever it is, your proverbial sinful cup of tea, whatever it is, there's definitely help for you available at the church. So get connected. If you have questions about that, find any one of your leaders, contact them, email them, leave them a random note, whatever it is, and I can guarantee you they'll be praying for you and they will get you connected to the very best of their ability. Now, I know this is a lot of heavy stuff, but I'm going to close this out in prayer and pray that we can be knowing the difference between our temptations and that we can be following along with these things as we go. So join me with prayer. God, thank you for this day. Lord, thank you for everything that you do for us. You are so amazing and you love us so perfectly well. God, you never promised that the Christian life is going to be easy. And Lord, the devil comes and he is going to fill our lives with temptations. But God, you've promised that you will not allow anything that is too far above us, too strong against us to rise, for nothing against you shall stand. And God, so I pray that as we go on with our lives and we feel those temptations coming on, Lord, help us to recognize those as temptations. And Lord, I pray that we can get into your word and we can know your facts and we can know the things that we need to know in order to resist this temptation. God, I pray that you can put on our minds and our hearts to remember our purpose, to serve you, and to be a light for those who don't know you. God, and I pray that we can have the strength to reject our tempter, no matter how strong that may be, no matter how tempting or how enticing it may be to go with the flow. God, I pray you can give us the strength and the wisdom just to be able to reject that. Lord, thank you for everything you do, all the resources you provide for us, and all the love that you give us. It's in your name that I pray. Amen.